All right, cool. So accessibility first and everyone wins is the name of this topic. People have heard of mobile first. I'm going to kind of tip it on its heads a little bit and talk about accessibility first. Of course, you can't always do all these things first. It doesn't make sense. But if you were to approach some things from this topic, here's what it might look like. So once again, my name is Joe Wroten. I work at Q2. And I am on the account opening team at Q2 eBanking. We do banking software, and on the team that I'm at, we actually make an account opening solution, as the name of the team sounds like. We actually build an application that's in Ember that is the most accessible, I'd say, and the easiest to get into. So the accessibility from all the ways that you could kind of take that to mean. Both from, like, actually I can use the keyboard to navigate around, to also, this is just easy to use. All the crazy questions about, am I IRS withhold? And like, what kind of accounts do I need? The crazy banking things get abstracted away a lot by our platform. That's what makes us really unique. And so when I come back to work every day to work on this platform, I'm really excited because we're building something that is like truly anybody can use. It's mobile first, and I'm really trying to push it to be kind of accessible first. All right, so I have a question to start this whole thing off. Who is the world's largest minority? We're all at this talk, so there's some giggles. But I mean, it's, oh wow, I found a button to make it go black. It's the B button, don't hit that one. People with disabilities, right? They are the largest minority. And I could take this from a traditional approach of doing an accessibility talk, where we really dig into the empathy side of things, which is very important. There are many fantastic reasons to go into why should we make an accessible website, an accessible app. But I would like to approach it from a slightly different perspective today. That being that something you can get buy-in from your product managers, your design team, and everybody that's working on this platform to build something, because you're going to be able to get access to more customers of the largest like untapped number of people that are trying, they want to use this application. They're looking for an account opening solution maybe that they have to say, oh, I guess I have to call them up, or I'm going to have to like go into the store if I can to kind of sign up. And then all the other reasons, so the empathy reasons are still just as valid. But this is a success story from the perspective of making it happen and looking at some code while we're doing it. And I'm convinced, after going through actually making this happen on the team, that with accessibility first, you can create a more composable, intuitive, and testable solution. And testable from an automated testing standpoint. So some of the things that we'll discuss in this talk will be a project feature that was saved by accessibility. We're going to be talking about some drag and drop that's in Ember. We're going to talk about how that was done, how we implemented it. Some accessibility research that went into making drag and drop accessible, because that already sounds like something that you can't do. Like that, how? We're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about some accessibility wrapper components, so bringing the Ember side back into things. And then finally, we're going to talk about the automated testing and how that went into this entire approach. So this was the product feature. This is our back-end solution, our back office solution for the CSRs. So the people that work at the bank or the financial institution, the credit union, they go into this platform to set up the account options for their checking accounts, savings accounts, their disclosures, their security settings, the queue of all the incoming applications, things like that. So for the products page, checking and savings accounts is what we currently have. We're adding CDs and things like that. We needed to allow them to be able to reorder things. So our designer comes to us and says, this is how we're going to do it. It's going to be great. You're going to be able to just drag and drop things around. Just take your mouse and you click on something, you grab it, pick it up, you move it up and down, you get that little blue bar, and the mouse changes into one of those little grabby hands. Makes sense, right? We've seen this 100 times. And then also, for the tabs, we need to be able to reorder the tabs, because that's going to represent on the other application when the user is going through on their mobile device, and they can say, I want a savings account or a checking account. Maybe this financial institution is more about savings accounts. That's what they're pushing. They're going to put that first, right? So there's many reasons to reorder things. And so we started looking at this and we're like, all right, yeah, the features need to be like mouse drag and drop. What are some other ways we can interact with this? Well, definitely there's going to be touch drag and drop, but that's almost a given. When we build the platform, assuming we spend a little bit of time on it, we're going to be able to get touch as well. But this is still only the pointing, different ways of just pointing an item, picking it up, moving it around. That's not going to satisfy all the different users that we want this to work for. And so I started bringing up, I was that annoying person who said, how are we going to do this with keyboard reordering? That's what is needed. So that was a tough one. And I was a little bit frustrated. I kind of went away with that excited, passionate kind of frustration, right? Of like, there's got to be something. Whether it's this design or something completely different, I don't know what it is. But there had to be something out there. And so I started doing the research. And my favorite place to do research, even though it's really hard to navigate, is the W3C. The W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, has all the best content, but it's dense. It is so dense. Luckily, search engines help us jump to the spots that we need to get to pretty easily. So I was able to, with a little bit of jumping around through search engines and the right search terms, I was able to arrive on what the W3C calls sortable list. And along the way, I learned a lot about ARIA roles. And so it looked like this. This is a little animation of it going around. So I'll let this loop a couple times so we can kind of absorb what's going on. But the idea is, instead of thinking about each of these items as an individual clickable point necessarily, this box is selectable. Almost like a multi-select drop-down that you've kind of pulled open. So you can select the entire thing, or you can select one of these buttons, like a regular button. You would just tab over to it, and it would highlight. And then you can use the arrow keys to just move up and down your selection, not the item. And then, you can just tab down to the up button, hit enter or space, and move it up and down. So these are the keyboard keys that are being entered. It's a little bit hard to follow, but generally I'm hitting spacebar to enter in that up button, and the enter key also does it. And so that allows me to select into the box, move my selection downward, tab down to the input I want to use, and then activate it on that selection as it moves up. That works actually really well. Also hidden behind the scenes are some keyboard shortcuts that aren't necessary for somebody who's just going to be clicking and dragging around or touching and dragging things around. There is, I think it's an ARIA keyboard hotkey or something like that is one of the attributes, and in there it says something like I can use command up, or I think it's alt up. That's alt up and alt down, and instead of having to fiddle around so much with your tabbing up to the up and down areas, you can just hit those hotkeys. So now not only have we made it an accessible list, but we also have some power user functionality if you wanted to kind of point them in that direction as well. It's another selling point you can give to a product manager and those CSRs that are just like wanting to do things a little bit faster. So this is great, and you can imagine how you could, with a little bit of manipulation, make this also work with a drag and drop. So we started looking into just doing that. I said, all right, we've got some time to do a spike, so I'm going to do a spike. I looked into how we're going to do this in Ember. The most basic option out there was Ember Sortable, but also I really liked it a lot. This is a community plugin, and it came with two components. Sorry, the sortable group component and the sortable item component. So the group being the thing that wraps everything, and the items being the individual items, almost like an unordered list, or in this case, an ordered list because you're reordering. And it was just really simple. They knew about each other. They can communicate back and forth, and that was really nice. And then instead of reopening this, extending it with my own functionality, I wrote some more custom wrappers that just went around this existing framework that was given to me. And so sortable group, now we have sortable group accessible. Sortable item accessible. And what's not pictured here is just the layer that's just a little bit underneath, is whatever component you're trying to have be sortable. So you might have something like sortable group accessible, sortable group. Sortable item accessible, sortable item. You might have an eats wrapping these, like for everything in my list, I'm going to have a sortable item accessible, and then a sortable item, and then UI tab, or maybe it's UI item, UI like the list item, whatever the thing happened to be. But having these wrappers was really nice, I think, because it didn't matter if it was a tab inside or it was a nav bar item inside. It was the same wrapper components doing the same functionality on the outside, just wrapping it together. So this ended up being a really nice solution. As I mentioned, we did a spike, and what better area to do a spike than in a living style guide? Living style guides in Ember. This one is using Ember Freestyle. And it uses live components to populate on the page, and it shows you the code that is used in order to make those happen. It shows you what they look like as you're interacting with it, hover states, click states, and then accessibility as well. It's one thing to show a picture of this is how it should look, and it's another to actually have a space to play with it, to interact with it. And if another developer comes in and says, I don't know, I need to use this sortable thing that we use, and they can dig into some of the code and try to detangle that from the controllers and the route and the business logic, or they can just come here and see it in isolation. I think the other nice thing about living style guides is they abstract what you're talking about. And so I'll come back to this idea later, but if you show in a design meeting how it looks in here, as opposed to in a page where it was expected to be seen, it frames the conversation differently, which I think was really helpful in this case. So in the living style guide, we took Ember Sortable by itself as the very first step, just put it into the style guide. Said, here it is, no customization, it's the plain version. Click and drag things around, up and down, it works for touch, it works for mouse. That's it at this point. And then I kind of did the visual part and also the accessibility part at the same time. So we're going to see right here, we tab in, we start moving our selection up and down. And then I use the hotkey to move the item up and down. And then I can tab over this up and down arrow, utilize it, move it up, move it down, and then move it back up again. And then if you grab the item, start dragging it around again, those arrow keys go away. I did work with my designer. I said, hey, here's something I want to try to achieve. And I threw at them like this more ugly version of this. It was like just some arrows kind of floating. I think they were up here or something. I said, this is not great, but now we had the idea down. What do you think would make this work? How can like everybody be happy in a situation? This is what we came up with.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. And then it also works here, going horizontally. It's the same concept. Click and drag these items around. And then you're just using the left arrow keys and right arrow keys. And then you can tab to the arrows and move it right and move it left. You can see how much I love abstracting this stuff, like foo and bar, how generic. No, but I love doing that because it starts pulling away the concepts. It's like not necessarily what the original thing was we're working on sometimes. I do this in automated testing a lot as well. I just look at, like, what if it's not all these banking terms? What if it was just generic words? Like, we're not thinking about the banking stuff anymore. We're just thinking about code. We're thinking about design, whatever it is. And then the other neat thing that came out of this, using those wrapper components in the way that we did, I didn't even think about left and right, up and down necessarily. I did maybe when it came to the icons that went onto the buttons and where they got placed. But actually the code, you can do up and down arrow keys on this with your keyboard. And over here, you can do left and right. I didn't see a reason to turn it off. It just works. It goes whatever direction. It's either going forward or backward is how I thought about it. And so I did the code in the same way. It kind of just goes forward or backward. So we got that in there. That was working. And now for some of the fun bit. We were able to test this now because it's hard to test drag and drop, but it's not so hard to test keyboard interaction. And so talking about a little bit of Ember stuff, we've got Ember test helpers, which has landed in Ember 3.0. Previously it was known as Ember native test helpers, which was a really nice library, and it's actually officially in Ember now, which is cool. You'll see that in a moment. This might not be super new, but it was rather new to me. I'm used to slightly older code where I'd say, yeah, send key character 11. That's the enter key or whatever it happens to be. Now you can just say, send the enter key. It's a string of enter or arrow down. It made me really happy. My tests were far more readable. And then async and await, which has been actually, we've been able to use it in Ember for a while now, but I believe it's like super official supported now. Like it's really, really there without a lot of other plugins and things. Like I believe we were using like Mokti's plugin for maybe import regenerator or something crazy like that. I don't think that's necessary anymore. I think it's just built in and it makes things really nice. And so I started jumping into testing. And after this presentation, I'll actually, if you're interested in looking at some of those tests, I'll show you more than just this one example. But I was going in and I was testing, like, okay, do the elements appear in the page? If I have multiple items, does it show me a list of items? And then I started seeing how far I could push it. Like, I don't think I can do all the testing for this, but can I focus in on an element? I can focus. Okay, it knows about focus. That's awesome. I didn't think that was going to work. What if I sent a key input? That worked, oh my goodness. And then it just kept going and going until I was even testing the hotkeys. And even that was working. So here's an example of one of the tests. I've kind of abstracted away some of the setup for the component setting the data. But we're using async and await now. So you just put async before your function. You can await your render. And then you can await focus. Focus you can just import in the top of your file from Ember test helpers. It's just part of Ember now. And then we use data test IDs like this. So I'm focusing on an element that matches a selector of a data test ID equals group. And I was using the idea of this group and an item. And I was just putting those data test IDs on my elements as I was doing it. So await focus on data test ID of group. So this focuses on it and waits until it's done. And then we move on. We await a trigger key event of on this group. We're going to send a key down of arrow down, so the down arrow. And then we assert that not equal. Basically, we're looking for the first item, I believe, to not have selected anymore. So here's an example of that. Yeah, that's how that works. And then you can do the opposite. You can start saying, okay, there's a second item in my list. Does that now have the selected class? And you can continue down in that methodology. You can extend this out as well to be like, does the first item's text content have what the original first ones have? And then you can kind of go down that path. But ultimately, it's async. You're making it render, focus, trigger event. With that kind of combination, I did everything that the user can do. And it's all tested in Ember. The other really nice thing is with our team, we have also an end-to-end like client test automation software suite, and that's using WebDriver IO and a bunch of other things to build up the entire backend and the database and all of that, which is great for the happy paths. But my goal has been, how much can I test in Ember in the tests that run within a second without having to set up any of that? And the answer increasingly has been a lot. My goal has been, can I hand off to our test automation team an entire feature and say, can you write one happy path test that just goes into the page, moves an item around, makes sure it persists by leaving the page, coming back, like it's in the database? Okay, good. That kind of stuff. Not the clicking and dragging and touching and dragging and like, I guess this isn't the best example, but validation errors is the kind of thing I can just like do all that in Ember now. The testing suite in Ember has gotten really good, and so I'm super proud of it. And so accessibility allowed us to test reordering. WebDriver IO doesn't even support clicking and dragging or touch and drop. None of that. This would have been an untested feature, period. In an app that we are like very proud of our tests. We automate as much as we can. Every new feature is automated. And we have a lot of explicit communication about what is and isn't tested, and we make sure we cover as much of that as we can. And this feature almost didn't have that. But by putting accessibility first, huge win. This is as tested as you could be. And so during the spike, we found that we were able to have a very quick feedback loop. This is something that Torrin Billups talks about a lot in his test-driven development talks, is that feedback loop of I'm working on something, I get some feedback, and I can kind of see as I'm working on it, I can see how well it turned out, instead of waiting weeks and weeks before you can kind of see where you're at. In this case, with the spike, we were able to see with the development, as I was working on it, I was able to do test-driven development for this feature. with the accessibility stuff, I was able to get a quick feedback loop with the design team. So I was talking with my designer saying, hey, here's something I'm working on. I want your feedback. Can you talk about where these buttons go? How about the selected states? What does that look like? And then also with the project managers, because I was able to say, here you go. Here's that design in an isolated little environment. We're just going to talk about these components right now. So the tabs and the lists on the side, reordering those. And how does this look? And what about the accessibility? How does it make you feel? You feel good with this being in the product? And yeah, that was just really great to be able to have that loop communicating. And they were able to sign off on the user experience of it. There was far less stress on QA, as I talked about, with not having to say, test everything in the end-to-end software suite. Didn't have to do any of that. It's all automated. And then there was less scope creep. It was just really nice to be able to say, nope, this is it. This is what it does. Talk about it now while it's in the living style guide, while we're all looking at it together. And I haven't even built out the routes, the controllers, the pages. None of that's been done yet. We can focus in on just what we're really talking about here. During the implementation, when I did actually start working on the routes and controllers and that kind of thing, there was just fewer surprises. I knew what to expect. This thing is done. I'm just now plugging it into the page. So that was nice. And then I was able to just write the model tests and the page tests, which is just like the standard stuff that you do. Again, no surprises there. It's pretty simple stuff. And then this is the final product in the app. You can see we're just kind of abusing it. We're just clicking around. We're making sure we can actually click on the items. We can click on tabs. We can tab the things. We're just doing every single feature possible. And it feels like there's a lot going on, but there almost kind of isn't. And all the keys are popping up down here as well. It's one of those things where if you were interacting with it, it like feels really nice. It demos fairly well, but it like is very. It feels nice once you understand what's going on. You're like, oh, okay. There's a nice feedback. Yeah. So that's it in the app.
Did you extend the test? Maybe you mentioned this. Did you extend the test for the actual mouse drag and drop?
No, we did not.
Quite port them over?
Couldn't quite, no. There was a little bit of tests around Ember Sortable to kind of handle some of that, but a lot of it was spied out or stubbed out, kind of faked, because there's just not a lot of great drag and drop testing. I did have another member of the Q2 team try to do some drag and drop testing, and they were successful, but with a lot of hardships along the way. So I'm not sure if I would really recommend going down that path with my current knowledge of Ember's test suite. So we were able to indirectly, basically we're ensuring that the functionality works, just maybe not as confident in the drag and drop with clicking, but we know that reordering works. Some of the things that we discussed today were the accessibility first methodology while developing a feature. It resulted in something that was more composable, meaning the tabs at the top and the nav items on the left-hand side, that was all the same code generally. It was the same wrappers, the same accessibility wrappers, the same reordering wrappers, and it didn't matter what was inside of it. It just handled it nicely. In fact, we have another feature coming up where we're going to be completely redoing tabs. Okay, no problem. The accessibility stuff, that's all taken care of. The reordering, it's all taken care of. We're just going to put something new on the inside of it. It's more discoverable to the user. So we've got mouse, touch, and keyboard. Not only that, but we also have the ARIA hotkeys and things like that. If you didn't really know how to interact with this, you couldn't see very well, the screen reader actually can pop up and say, this item can receive focus. It is a list, so it knows it's a list. It's got the proper semantics wrapping around it. And it knows when it's focused. It knows when it knows about the hotkey. So it'll be able to tell you, like, if you hit these keys, then you'll be able to interact with it in this way. It's communicated to the user through HTML as opposed to, oh, it'll be learned behavior. The user will figure it out. And then there was more test coverage, way more than I expected for this feature. When we were talking about it in design meetings, I was just thinking, no way, it's not going to happen. But it did. And it resulted in some better user experience, better UX, and fewer regrets later. We're going to pay this price eventually, right? Drag and drop comes in as a feature that's requested, and as with anything that's going to have to be accessible someday, you're thinking, we're either going to pay for it now or we're going to pay for it later. It's the same thing with doing automated testing. Either we're going to pay the price now and write tests, or we're going to come back in 6 months and wonder why we didn't. Similar argument. And then I was able to ship this with confidence. We had a lot of churn on the team from different people coming in and off the team, and different styles of coding, automated tests. We were just starting to do code reviews and things like that. And when this feature landed, I just felt really confident that it was going to work. And it was going to work in all the browsers. It was going to work for the accessibility terms that needed to be met, and the testing and all of that stuff just felt really good. So I like to wrap up these kind of talks, not just with the here's what we talked about slide, but also the how do we continue this conversation slide. And so how do you continue this conversation is integrating tooling like Ember A11y, Ember Accessibility into your project. This is a fabulous suite of software that is a Ember add-on. You do an Ember install on it. The README on the GitHub project talks about it, and it's really easy to integrate. It will give you the option, if you want to either at a page level or at a integration test level, rendering test level for the component, say, fail this entire test suite if this component is not accessible. Like, if somebody were to go in later and make the component no longer accessible, that could even be for like not being able to see different color contrast very well, so it even knows about color contrast and things like that. It'll just fail the entire suite if you wanted it to. It's also really nice that it gives you the options to buy into it slowly. So we're still buying into accessibility and trying to integrate it. If I were to just turn this on site-wide, it just starts highlighting everything. But we can start saying like, okay, we're going to work on this page. We're going to turn on the feature on this page, and we're going to work through it. And it helps with that a lot. There are, of course, other wonderful tools out there to do accessibility work, but in Ember, this one is great because it like integrates in with your build suite. It works with Travis, for example, your continuous integration software, will be able to pick up on a bad test. And another thing you can do is make accessibility a priority at your next design meeting. That's how this entire thing started. And to continue this conversation, it starts with all of you doing the same sort of thing. If you see something pop up in a design meeting and you're like, this is not going to be accessible, talk about that. Sometimes you have to be that person. But the passion of going out, finding a solution that maybe is going to work, talking about different alternatives, you might be surprised what you find. And then lastly, just talking about it. That's what I'm doing right here, right now. And hashtag A11y is a thing on Twitter you can do if that's what you're into. Write about it, talk about it in general. That's it. I'm Joe Wroten. Thanks for listening.